So thank you very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to present the paper on which I have been working for a while now on ethics of artificial intelligence in finance, on responsibility for ignorant action. And so sorry for not being with you today in person. However, I'm very grateful to Emiliano for organizing this conference because it really provides a very generous opportunity to discuss a paper. So I have an hour and you seldom get so much time to discuss a paper. And it's very important for me because, as I said, I've been working or thinking about this paper for a while and would really appreciate your comments and suggestions at the end. So basically, the problems that I address in this paper is quite straightforward. Whom and how to hold responsible for AI action. And by AI action, I mean the situation in which AI algorithms decide and act independently, or primarily independently of humans. And I will show you some solutions that are provided in the literature for this problem. I will argue that I find some of those solutions dissatisfactory, and then I will come up with my own suggestions. However, the last part, I would really like to discuss with you in more details. So the point of departure for my talk is the distinction that has been made by Christian Borg and Bohemin, who is in the virtual audience, I could see. So they published a number of papers recently pointing out that we observe a kind of a change in finance with respect to AI, the change from the first generation AI to the second generation, so how they call it. But this change is really of important qualitative nature. Because in the situation of the first generation AI, we have kind of two inputs into the algorithm. We have input of data and also of human-defined rules. However, if we think about more advanced machine learning algorithms, such as, for example, deep learning algorithms, where we have a kind of many layers or many hidden layers between input and output. Very often the user then cannot really explain how algorithm came up with a particular decision or with a particular output. So as a result, some of AI users in finance who use them in trading, for example, say that they find themselves holding a position, but they cannot explain why they are holding this particular position. Or how Christian Hansen put it, traders become decision reviewers rather than decision makers. And this qualitative change is very important because it might raise some important ethical issues. And I use in this paper an example of the situation when an AI algorithm managed clients' money. And this is a real life case. It is not made up by myself. So in March 2017, a sales representative of a company that applies AI met over lunch in Dubai a famous tycoon, Samartulik in Khan, and they discussed a fund, AI managed fund by a company Tindaris. And this sales representative, who is also known by peers in the industry as Captain Magic, He explained that this algorithm is an absolutely fantastic tool because it is based on machine learning, can evaluate a lot of social media data, real-time news, predict investor sentiment, and based on this, make predictions for US stock futures. And it learns from its experience and becomes better and better. And Lee Khan said this is a fantastic tool for him. It's really his thing. He would like to invest, and he indeed trusted $2.5 billion to Tyndaris, or basically to this AI algorithm. And then, so the plan was to double this money. However, the computer started trading and it was not so successful. It started to regularly lose money, and already in February, so basically after 3 months, Lee terminated the contract and sued Tyndaris for misrepresentation. Basically, he sued the salesperson that supposedly did not explain clearly enough what this algorithm can do or what it cannot do. However, of course, for ethicists, this is an interesting situation because, of course, we could ask, is it a right thing to blame this sales representative, or maybe the company should be blamed, the algorithm designer could be blamed, or algorithm itself, right? So who should be considered responsible in such a situation? And so just nota bene, the paper originally also entailed the other example, which takes this one to a higher level, so to say. It considers situations in which AI algorithms collude with each other, mimic each other, possibly contributing to systemic risks. So the paper about it was published already in AI and Ethics journal. But basically the arguments that I develop kind of relates to what I will present later. However, so if you are interested, you could go to this particular paper, but in this talk, I will focus on example number 1, the situation in which AI algorithm manages clients' money and how to judge about it ethically. The answer to the question how to assign responsibility, moral responsibility, in the literature is usually based on 2 conditions that come back to Aristotle. So one condition is the so-called epistemic condition. So we have to ask, was the person aware of what she was doing, of its consequences, moral significance, etc. And the second condition is control or freedom condition. Was the person acting freely when she was doing it? And so I would say that in this talk, I'm interested in epistemic condition, and some colleagues in the audience, like Baldwin and Christian, already pointed to the importance of epistemic condition while assigning moral responsibility in finance, in financial markets. However, what this epistemic condition, or how it is very often understood in the literature, is related to the so-called searchlight view. It means that an agent's responsibility extends as far as his or her awareness of what he is doing is given. So we ask ourselves what the agent knew about the issue, and if he or she did know something, we could maybe say that he or she should have known, should have searched for knowledge, relevant knowledge. So it is why it is like a torch or searchlight. So they have to be sure that they are searching for a knowledge that is relevant and to do the right thing. And indeed, with respect to AI, if we look at recent papers, all of them would say, so this is one of the most recent publications, all of them would say to hold AI responsible, we have to have a human in the loop, and we need so someone who will be held responsible, and this human would have to have an explanation available on the system's recommendation. So this epistemic condition of responsibility should somehow apply. And so even if we have this deep learning algorithm with hidden layers, that is basically black box, this shouldn't happen. We should move as responsible agents towards white box and avoid any type of non-knowledge about algorithms. And if we look at regulation, for example, this paper by European Commission, regulation on AI, the suggestion AI Act. Also, if we look how they treat the opacity and intransparency, you read in this document that users should be able to interpret the system output. Right, so a certain degree of transparency is required. Of course, this is a kind of straightforward, and so often when I present my argument, people say, okay, so the problem is kind of solved, so what to discuss here? If you go to financial markets, everything is regulated, the agents have to know the algorithm, understand it, explain it, and so on. However, I personally see there is a problem, and the problem relates to the very nature of AI. Well,
we can't hear you anymore. I think you're frozen. Yeah.
Nature, I would say. It is also why we develop.
Ekaterina, could you go back a little bit, because we missed, I think, part of the explanation of the slide.
Sorry, which one? This one?
If you start with the new slide, I think there you stopped. Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, now you're excellent. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So my point is that this searchlight view that I just presented that basically dominates the discussion about AI kind of ignores an important contradiction. So I said that the part of the very nature of AI, why it is developed and used, is its ability to learn and act independently. All right, so we kind of develop AI, complicated AI tools exactly because they are better than human brain or have better ability to do particular tasks. And if we say that this is a part of AI characteristics or nature, then we could expect a particular ignorance on the side of designers, users, and clients. And this is important because the logical consequence of it is that epistemic condition of responsibility might not fully apply in case of AI. And some people already, like Kokelberg, already pointed to it. And also there are some papers published now that say that explainable AI is kind of fully explainable AI is illusory for many reasons. So it is, we can hardly expect that we will have AI that if it is really truly complicated and really combines variables in an unknown way or innovative way, that it will be a completely white box. So my point is that if AI is applied, then a particular level of ignorance is to expect. So AI produce states of ignorance that require systematic ethical considerations. So so it is not just about knowledge, but about states of ignorance, and agents have to ethically deal with unknowns and ethicists as well. So the central question for me is then how to define responsibility under conditions of ignorance. And this is not a trivial question. However, it has been already addressed in some literature. But before I go to this literature, again, I would like to highlight one very important difference following the philosopher Nicholas Rescher, who said that we have two types of ignorance. One is so-called culpable ignorance, when one should know something but doesn't. So this is the searchlight view. And the other one is kind of inevitable ignorance, where there just is no possible way of knowing something, that certain information is not in practice accessible. And I would say that this is inevitable ignorance is very interesting and relevant for AI ethics, whereas culpable ignorance is more relevant for AI regulation. And so this is our focus then. And answers in the literature that I could find, or kind of approximation to the answers, are in accounts of moral epistemology. This is a type of strand of philosophy where people, the philosophers, ask how to assign responsibility for ignorant wrongdoing. So sometimes agents don't know something. When are their ignorance culpable, and when it is excusable, and why? And how to hold ignorant wrongdoers responsible. And maybe this is the most important and central question for AI ethics, I would say. And it is why I thought maybe it would make sense to apply findings of George Scher, for example, and others who worked on moral epistemology to AI ethics. However, the problems that I saw here is that if they talk about ignorance or ignorant wrongdoers, they are kind of, to solve this problem, how to assign responsibility in the situation of ignorance, they always come up with some psychologically based decisions or solutions. So agents have particular desires, beliefs, dispositions that lead them to particular acts about which we try to form ethical conclusion, or to come to ethical conclusion. And so basically it is about psychology here, and technology is completely ignored in those accounts. So it is very difficult to apply those accounts to any type of technology, including AI. So we are talking not about purely psychologically motivated actions, we are talking about technologically enhanced actions. And so moral epistemology kind of doesn't consider them at all. And so finally, so from all this search, I came up with the following suggestions. So I think that to think about moral responsibility in the situation when technology complicated technology is involved, we might want to understand agents' epistemic situation, and it might be central for the discussion of moral responsibility. And by this, I mean that we kind of have to identify reasonable obligations to know in this situation. So not just you have to know and understand everything, otherwise don't touch AI or any other technology. There might be reasonable expectations of what, for example, fund managers can know and what they cannot know. Can we expect from fund managers that they are fully informed about new research, cutting-edge research about explainable AI? Maybe not. If we would like to expect this, maybe this expertise should be somehow centrally shared to be accessible. So what is reasonable to explain here? Are there difficulties in acquiring relevant knowledge? So some moral epistemology accounts suggest that we indeed might want to take such difficulties into account. What is difficult to know about AI, about explainable AI, and so on. So as a result, maybe we have to create knowledge about actors' non-knowledge, so to say. So investigate what is not known now, what cannot be known in principle, and will most likely never be known. And I see here an important, so you can see already that in this paper, so when I will proceed with it, I might really make a connection between limits and limitations of explainable AI and ethical considerations. But backtesting, for example, is also an important issue because in this lawsuit about Syndaris, the whole discussion about AIs that manage clients' money was about how well the algorithm was backtested. Was it backtested properly, or were some limitations, some faults, and so on. So such purely scientific issues, you can see, become absolutely ethically relevant. So basically the limits of technology, understanding the limits of technology is become central for assigning moral responsibility and for ethical judgment. So allowing us to think about which non-knowledge is morally relevant and which is it's not. And I think that this might also inform regulation because as it is created, so in the papers, white papers, code it is that we have that are circulated now, really kind of try to ignore ignorance. So they do not accept that there might be situations in which agents don't know something. But we might talk in those white papers and other regulatory papers about reasonable obligations to know and morally relevant knowledge or morally relevant ignorance. And I think it opens also for us as people involved in finance and philosophy, a lot of possibilities to collaborate and contribute because as philosophers, we know there has been a lot of work on what is an explanation, what is an interpretation, what does it mean to know, to be ignorant, what is the use of a good model or other technological tool. And I think so this is good to mention in the inaugural conference on finance and philosophy. So basically this is my thoughts. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to discussion. Thank you.
very much, Ekaterina. Let's see how we organize the discussion so that you may be able to see or at least hear the question, right? Is that where the microphone is for, Emiliano?
Yeah, it's for questions.
Yeah, shall I walk around with the microphone? Right. Well, how do you want to proceed?
The people are willing to do a questions to go to the desk. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's excellent. Yeah. So
against each other.
So what we'll do is we'll bring the people who have a question for you to the desk so you can see the person who's asking the question. So I'm going to. Yeah. Good. Questions. Melissa.
Yeah. Sorry.
You have to go.
Hi, Ekaterina.
Hi.
Because otherwise you cannot see me. Okay. Hi, Ekaterina.
Hi.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I was wondering, let me see if I can frame this in a nice way. So I was wondering whether we can totally associate the regulatory framework that we would like to have with the attribution of moral responsibility. So what I'm trying to say here is finding moral responsibility the way in which we would like to frame regulation, right? And I think, so the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm thinking, say, back when AI didn't exist and people were relying on expertise to go to these managers, right? And they would be relying on charts, on fundamentals, on whatever. But perhaps the decision on which they would decide to make build a certain portfolio or a certain investment strategy wouldn't necessarily be totally transparent, right? So I'm wondering whether this is really a problem of moral responsibility or whether the problem is really because we would like to regulate in a way and that is not necessarily connected to attributing moral responsibility. I don't know if this is if I'm making much sense here, but at least in the case that the example that you presented, it's not clear to me why this would be worrisome from a regulatory point of view, in the sense that, you know, the person knew that this was AI and everyone knows that investing is a risky issue, right? So in a sense, it's not clear to me why we would like to regulate this particular issue here, or why that would be very different from relying on the expertise on somebody whose decision mechanism, so to say, or decision taking framework is not obviously transparent to everyone, because that is precisely their expertise, right? So they would rely on the fact that they are experts in order to be able to come up with a particular investment strategy. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense, but maybe whether you can react to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Melissa, for the question. So for me, it is important, so maybe to highlight again that I kind of see regulation and ethics as interrelated but still separate issues. Regulation wants to make sure that AI is used in a responsible way. So for them, the question who is responsible is very, very important. But also, if we are talking about situations without AI, in finance, always someone is responsible for the performance of the fund, for clients' portfolios, whatever. So responsibility is an important question, but maybe, it is important in different ways than for ethics. So ethics is a part of philosophy. And in philosophy, I would say our task is to ask important and interesting questions, maybe not to produce the direct answers. And so for me in this paper, yeah, regulation of course is important, and they kind of give an answer that very often is given also in ethical papers, and that's why I maybe put them together. But as an ethicist, it is interesting to ask the question, if we indeed have agents who are not in possession of full knowledge, how to assign responsibility for such an act. So this is for me the purely ethical questions that I try to address. And all the time when I'm talking about it, I get this response, yeah, in finance, everything is regulated anyway, so why to bother? And I think that regulation is still a separate field from ethics.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Francesco.
Hi. I have a follow-up in a sense to what Melissa has asked. I think she asked a really good question. And I guess a natural follow-up to that question is that, you know, there are a lot of people who participate in financial markets who have absolutely no idea of what they're doing. And, you know, I'm talking about ordinary people, you know, like me, and, you know, and obviously we try to give explanations to ourselves a lot of the time, and a lot of these explanations are actually often more affabulations and, you know, attempts to rationalize things that we do. But, you know, the overwhelming evidence about, you know, the ordinary, you know, people in the, you know, who invest their money in financial markets is that they have very limited understanding of what they're doing. So if you think that there is an ethical question about AI and, you know, understanding what these programs are doing, and that, you know, this question is somehow also related to regulation, I mean, I wonder, what should we do about these people? And there are certain things that we do, right? I mean, there are certain limitations about, you know, who can invest and what kind of investments they do. But certainly there is nothing remotely similar to a kind of full knowledge requirement, you know, for these people to participate in these markets. So I guess, you know, a natural follow-up to Melissa's question is, are we sure, you know, really that the question of ethics and the question of regulations, you know, are relevant somehow in the same way? I mean, it seems to me, I agree with Melissa that the issue of regulation is largely detached from the ethical question of responsibility, and it seems to me that there isn't really any particular implication from lack of full understanding of what is going on in these AI programs.
Yeah, so, but a lack of expertise on the side of normal people, so to say, but also on the side of financial professionals is exactly the point that, so we have many participants in the market, but all of them kind of don't possess the full knowledge, but they possess pieces of this knowledge. And every time someone will, if someone loses money, or there is an important financial harm to clients who invested in a fund, the question will arise, who is responsible for this financial harm? So I basically don't really understand why is it irrelevant. I think this question has been raised all the time, for example, after financial crisis. So there was so many people losing money. The question was, who is responsible, whom to blame? And you can relate these questions to the point who knew what or didn't know. And this is, I think this is a discussion of the epistemic condition of moral responsibility. But I still think that all the time the question about responsibility has been raised when money was lost.
Thank you very much. I'm also looking at the online participants, if there's anyone who wants to raise a question there. So maybe you simply should start speaking up because I can't see everyone on this screen. So if you have a question online, then just open your microphone and ask your question. Well, that didn't lead to much response. Is there a question in the room among the live audiences? Let's start with you, Taylor.
Hi, Ekaterina. It's good to see you.
Hi, Taylor.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting paper on an important topic. I guess I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, so in your paper, your argument kind of turns on this idea that AI has these special ethical considerations because of the automated nature of its decision-making process. And I guess it seems to me that, you know, for a long time in finance, you know, people have been using pretty simple models like linear regression that, you know, in some sense aren't so different from AI, except they're much simpler. You know, they tend to be, the models tend to be linear, but ultimately the way these models are trained is, you know, still some sort of optimization process. So, I mean, it seems like the kind of, one of the other defining features of AI is this sort of problem of interpretability, explainability. And I just wonder if your paper, I think for me, your argument would be stronger if you kind of, I think your argument works, but if you sort of define that as the key issue and the ignorance stems from the problem of interpretability. So I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but if you could kind of talk about why the issue of automation is sort of the sort of important criterion, that would be great.
Automation?
Yeah.
So, but automation, just pure automation, I think is less an issue because automation could be very straightforward. It could be based on if-then rules, and then everything is clear. So it is just hidden in the machine, but why vertical output comes out is absolutely clear.
Right, but so how is an AI system fundamentally different from a trading model based on, you know, sort of a linear regression model?
Yeah, okay. But it's what I tried to introduce on the very first slide, the difference between this first generation and second generation models.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a qualitative difference or distinction between simple models when we already give them the rules, and the other models where the rules are not given but developed by the machine while acting in learning in the market.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so this is, so I think the situation is most interesting, yeah, absolutely interesting in the situation of the second type of AI.
I see. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And there was another question from Emiliano.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Ekaterina, for your very interesting talk and also very interesting answers to our questions. Maybe I have a question about responsibility in the sense that I imagine a situation where, for instance, a hedge fund is making profit. I mean, the aim is making profit. And an AI system suggests, for instance, a kind of investment, but you don't know how. So you don't understand. You cannot explain why is it suggesting this particular stock, for instance. And but if I understand correctly your argument, you shouldn't buy this stock if you cannot explain why. I mean the human beings. And so I was wondering how we should behave when the AI system is right. and the human is wrong in not accepting that recommendation. I mean, if the
yeah, but it's I refer to the situation in which algorithms are allowed to make decisions and act upon those decisions. So there is no human interaction basically in the acting of algorithms. So in this particular case that I presented, the algorithm was trading itself without any human interference. So it was just was trained on particular data, and then it continued to get data from the market, and it came up with a decision to go long or short, and has done it, was doing it for 3 months, and the result was poor. But it was not no humans in the loop here.
Yeah, I mean, but if you're willing to have someone or somebody responsible for the final decision, I mean.
Yeah, so this is why the situation is so interesting. So should we blame an algorithm? Can we blame a machine for the poor result? Because there is no human to blame. Or we should really blame the salesperson, or, you know, or the fund manager. So this is absolutely not clear.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking of the opposite scenario when the algorithm is right. I mean, but you know, after the decision that is right, of course, because if you don't accept a good decision because you cannot explain it, but the decision turned out to be right.
Yeah.
But you don't follow the decision because the humans cannot explain why this decision should be taken. And so there is a conflict between the human side and the black box side. I mean, the AI system in the decision, in the sense that, of course, if the algos is doing poorly, we shouldn't accept his recommendations. But what about if it's doing right? But we cannot explain why he's doing those recommendations, not others. That's, I mean, the same case I have in mind. How we should behave in this case, also from a regulatory viewpoint.
But I think the situation is the same. Basically, we don't have any insight in what is going on within the machine, and yeah, so assigning responsibility would be basically the same as in the case of losing money, no?
Yeah, but we are not losing money. That's the point. I mean, the sense.
But the point is, what is interesting, I think, in the examples that I presented, is that the client terminated the algorithm trading after 3 months. But maybe if he stayed with his investment for maybe a year, the algorithm would have provided great results. We just don't know. Maybe it would have learned a lot and became excellent. I mean, so this is also the question of timing. So what should we know as investors who use AI about timing of algorithmic trading?
Okay.
Okay, I will think about your question about positive outcomes. I don't have an answer.
Okay, but thank you very much. I mean,
yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much for your talk.
Are there any questions from the audience? Then I will ask my question now. I've been waiting for this question, but so I think it's a super interesting topic and a super interesting paper that you've presented today. So there's lots of things that I would like to discuss, of course, about the epistemic condition, where you refer to the work that I and Christian have been conducting here. So it's really intriguing to think about what it means for either the AI system or for the service provider that offers the services to know or not to know what is going on. But the question I have is a bit less sort of detailed, we can do that at another occasion, then maybe a more general question here also, because you raised this relationship or the relevance of these questions to regulation. I was thinking of earlier similar, or well, I think similar, but maybe we disagree about that. Similar questions that arose, for instance, with respect to the chemical industry, right? So there's a lot of similarities, I think, in the sense that you develop certain chemicals, and only years after you've been sold them to people, the negative effects of these chemicals are they become visible. For instance, in industry, but also in the form of drugs, medicines. So why is this situation from a regulatory point different? At least, well, I assume that you think that that this situation is fundamentally different from the situation with respect to the chemical industry, because of the fact that you can assign or ascribe certain epistemic conditions to a system of AI, or at least it's more similar there, and philosophers will be thinking about this, and it would be really odd to assign say mental states to a chemical. But then isn't there a lot of similarity still with respect to regulation, because ultimately it boils down to the fact who is going to pay for the damages. So isn't in the end the best way to proceed simply to say, look, if you provide these sorts of services, you have to have a decent contract, but things that are not foreseen will ultimately have to be incorporated in or split in some sense between the seller and the buyer, as we also see that in the chemical industry, where sometimes it's the buyer who actually has to bear the risk, but in other cases it's actually the industry that has to pay for certain of these damages. So is there a similarity, yes or no? And if so, what are the repercussions? That's the question that I have.
Okay, thank you. I think, yes, I think there is a similarity because we are talking about risky products, the products that involve some risks to users. However, I will have to think about the differences because, of course, a chemical molecule is not working on itself somehow, but AI does. So does it imply any difference for the conclusion? I really have to think about it. But what I wanted to say is, again, so I personally think it is important to not to discuss who will be paid for the damage in a particular situation, because this is really a question of regulation, lawsuits, courts, and so on. I think ethics asks different type of questions, and we kind of should take a step back before we discuss also payments flows and so on. So the question of ethics is more profound and fundamental. Who can be reasonably held to account in such a situation? So for me, this is an ethical question, and it is not about who will pay in the first place, but it is purely a question of moral epistemology, epistemic condition, and so on. And I would like to analyze this situation from this perspective. And somehow, as I said, my paper is very often gets these regulatory responses. So what does it imply for regulation immediately? So which recommendations would come? Yes, maybe I could do it in a particular stage when I am clear about ethical implications first. And the ethics is for me not a part of regulation, but a part of philosophy. So I am presenting this paper here.
Thank you very much. That is a very Very clear answer. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see if there are other questions in the room.
Oh, I might have a follow-up to that answer.
If you're willing to come back to the front, then
sorry.
that will be lovely. Yeah. So Melissa will have a follow-up question for you.
It's a very simple one, actually. So, yeah, thank you again. Since we have the time, so I guess I'm wondering, giving your response to Boudewijn. So, okay, yes, I can see how we would like to attribute responsibility in some sense, and this is a matter of ethics. But I wonder whether you can fully dissociate them. And I mean, it seems to me that we might find ethical responsibility, and because of that, regulation would follow, right? Otherwise, if that is not the case, right, then I would ask, okay, what's the point of attributing responsibility? Except
we could provide some recommendations for regulation, but I would like to solve ethical issues first, or find a satisfactory answer to them, and it's what I don't have at the moment. Yeah.
And so, okay, then let me put it this way then. What's the use of attributing ethical responsibility besides being interesting for philosophy in itself?
Yeah, so it is, yeah, should we talk about responsibility at all in any situations? So this is a kind of question. If responsibility, accountability, and so on are irrelevant, then the whole paper is irrelevant, or the whole literature on it is irrelevant. Yeah, maybe it is, so it is one of the central issues, and I think it is interesting. And of course, regulation might follow, but my recommendation, so preliminary recommendation for regulation, was to pay attention to ignorance, not to focus on the claim, guys, yes, we understand you cannot know many things, but yet you have to know. So this is not a solution for me. And this is what regulation really requires all the time with respect to AI. And I think it's completely dissatisfactory because it is a contradiction in itself. You cannot know, but you have to know. How should it happen? And regulation, I think, so if you go to the papers, download them, AI codes, AI white papers, AI acts, and so on, and you search for ignorance, non-knowledge, whatever, it doesn't appear. Yes, you have words like opacity or intransparency, but it is kind of not an issue, or it is an issue that should be ultimately solved. But if it cannot be ultimately solved, then we have really very interesting ethical or moral situation to discuss and to think about. So this is my point. And for regulation, it is crucial then to understand what a person whom you hold responsible, what he or she can reasonably know. Not require full knowledge, fully transparent AI, which is impossible for particular types of AI. So, so how to go about it? So for me, it is an important regulatory question that is just ignored and not answered in any regulatory documents. And so this is my point. So by trying to answer an ethical question, yeah, I see some deficiencies in recent regulatory documents. And so this is how ethics would have implications for regulation. Certainly it will, and it has. And so I have some preliminary thinking about it, but I would like to develop this paper further. And as I said, I might try to connect explainability, this XI, its limitations to a question about moral responsibility. I think this is where interesting insights could be produced.